They believed Africa's gold was nothing more than collateral. But when hundreds of millions were seized at a European port under Washington's command, they didn't just steal wealth. They tried to steal Africa's pride. What was meant to break Burkina Faso has instead awakened a storm of resistance, and Ibrahim Traoré is about to turn this stolen gold into a fight for freedom that could change Africa forever. A shipment of gold from Burkina Faso, worth hundreds of millions of dollars, was seized at a European port. There was no accident, no legal case. It was pure politics. Under direct pressure from Washington, the containers never reached their destination. And then came Trump's voice, sharp, unapologetic, and deliberate. If Africa wanted access to global markets, it would have to pay its dues. In Ouagadougou, the news struck like an earthquake for President Ibrahim Traoré. This was not business. It was theft. The gold mined by his people, the very wealth meant to fund schools, hospitals, and food security, had been turned into collateral for debts dictated by outsiders. Crowds poured into the streets, their anger spreading faster than wildfire. "They steal in daylight and call it law," shouted one man at a rally. The truth was undeniable. If Africa's gold could be stopped and seized, then Africa's sovereignty itself was under siege. What could have been a humiliation that broke a nation instead pushed Traoré to fight back. What began as a single shipment seized at a port was about to ignite a battle over Africa's right to control its own future. The seizure was no mistake. It was strategy. In Washington, Trump framed it as a warning to the Sahel. If they wanted the benefits of global trade, they must honor their debts. Behind the cameras, officials admitted the truth. This was about the IMF. For decades, Africa's loans had been tied to conditions written in Washington and Paris. The International Monetary Fund demanded repayment in U.S. dollars, backed by guarantees. But as African nations like Burkina Faso began turning toward new partners, BRICS, India, Russia, the West grew nervous. What if those loans went unpaid? What if Africa simply walked away from the system? Trump's answer was brutal: seize the gold. Washington pressured Europe to intercept Burkina Faso's shipment. The message was unmistakable: your resources are collateral, whether you agree or not. The logic was cold, but clear. If Africa attempted to break from IMF dependency, its most valuable assets would be frozen before ever leaving port. The revelation spread quickly. Ministers informed Traoré that the gold had been officially classified as security against outstanding debt. Debt inherited from past regimes. Debt forced under colonial terms. Debt that had already drained more from Africa than it had ever given. It was the final insult. A farmer on local radio asked, "We never signed those loans. Why should our gold pay for them?" A teacher added, "If they keep our gold, they are stealing the future of our children." Inside the presidential palace, Traoré addressed his cabinet. His voice was calm but firm. "This is not about debt. This is about control. If they succeed, Africa will never own its tomorrow." Washington had achieved its immediate goal, but in Africa, the effect was the opposite. It fueled something far more dangerous: unity. The streets of Ouagadougou erupted, not in confusion, but in righteous anger. The gold wasn't stolen by pirates, nor delayed by storms. It had been seized as collateral for IMF debts. Mothers who struggled to buy bread shouted, "Whose gold is it? Ours or theirs?" Youth carried signs that read, "Our gold is not your guarantee." The outrage was not about money alone. It was about betrayal. The realization that Africa's wealth was still treated as someone else's property. Some ministers urged diplomacy. "We can negotiate for its release." One suggested nervously. Offer repayment schedules, compromises. Others shook their heads. Traore rose. His words cut through the silence. They want us to bow. They want us to pay debts we did not choose, with gold mined by our blood. If we bend today, there will be nothing left to stand on tomorrow. The cabinet understood. This was no longer about finance. It was about sovereignty. Meanwhile, protests swelled. Miners marched from the goldfields carrying their tools, like weapons of resistance. Students staged sit-ins, demanding Burkina Faso leave the IMF altogether. Even soldiers muttered in their barracks, "If they can seize our gold, what will they seize next?" Western media painted another picture. CNN called Traore reckless. European commentators muttered about instability. But inside Africa, the narrative shifted. People didn't see recklessness, they saw defiance. And in that defiance, Traore sensed an opening. The seizure meant to humiliate Burkina Faso instead became a rallying cry. Africa's wealth could no longer be trusted to foreign hands. For days, newspapers ran a single headline: Gold seized. Nation betrayed. Radio hosts repeated Trump's words: Africa must pay its dues. The phrase echoed like a challenge carved in stone. The West thought it had forced Africa to kneel. But Traore had other plans. He summoned an emergency meeting of the Alliance of Sahel States. Mali's envoys arrived quickly, declaring, "Your gold is our fight too." Around the table, frustration boiled. Every country had suffered. Shipments delayed, reserves frozen, contracts rewritten with a foreign pen. Traore laid out the truth. They call it collateral. I call it ransom. And if we accept this ransom, it will never end. The room went silent. Then Mali's minister spoke. What if we stop sending gold through their ports? What if we keep it in Africa? Heads turned. For the first time, an idea once dismissed as fantasy felt real. An African gold reserve, built, guarded, and owned on African soil, beyond the reach of Paris, Brussels, or Washington. Fear lingered. Some ministers warned, if we break with the IMF, sanctions will crush us. But Traore cut through the doubts. They already suffocate us. Did the IMF save us when reserves were frozen? Did sanctions feed our people? No. They steal with one hand and loan with the other. Enough. Support poured in. Niger's minister declared, our uranium is theirs only because we let them ship it. Why not guard it ourselves? Mali added, for years our gold has left our soil to fund their banks. If the moment to stop is now, then let it be now. Beyond the meeting hall, the idea caught fire. Protesters chanted, keep the gold. Build the vault. Murals showed gold bars breaking free from chains. African analysts explained how pooling reserves could protect the Sahel from currency manipulation. European newspapers scoffed. Officials whispered of dangerous populism. But the more the West condemned it, the more legitimacy it gained. For the first time in generations, Africa wasn't reacting to the West, it was planning for itself. Traore ordered advisors and generals to draft the first steps. Stop sending gold through European ports. Build vaults on African soil. Economists mapped out a joint stock of gold between Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, an African financial shield. But Traore understood, this wasn't just about walls and ledgers. It was about trust. If we build this vault, he told Sahel leaders, it will not belong to Burkina Faso, nor Mali, nor Niger. It will belong to Africa. The vision struck deep. Decades of mistrust between neighbors began to melt in the face of a common wound. On the ground, convoys of gold were guarded by soldiers. Contracts with Western refineries were quietly cancelled. Negotiations opened with BRICS to provide refining technology. For the first time, Africa positioned itself not as a supplier of raw materials, but as a guardian of value. Western intelligence sounded alarms. If the African gold reserve became real, IMF leverage across the continent could collapse. The West retaliated. Banks froze African transactions. Insurance companies denied coverage. Even humanitarian aid was delayed. Trump doubled down. If Africa wants a seat at the global table, it must learn to follow the law. To him, the law was IMF contracts and dollar dominance. Anything else was chaos. Western media amplified the threat, calling the reserve reckless, Traore dangerous. But in Ouagadougou, the threats only fueled resistance. Farmers pledged part of their harvest. Students declared, "If they fear it this much, then it must be our only hope." Traore told his generals, "They will starve us, smear us, and isolate us. But they cannot break us unless we let them. This is no longer about gold. This is about freedom itself." Instead of fear, conviction spread. Sanctions tightened. Cargo ships were stopped. But BRICS stepped in. Envoys arrived in Ouagadougou with offers: direct gold purchases, refining technology, alternative markets. Traore told his cabinet, "They tried to isolate us. Instead, they have opened new doors." The movement deepened. Farmers, students, soldiers, and workers rallied. Military leaders declared loyalty to the Republic. Western newspapers panicked. If Africa aligns with BRICS on gold, the dollar itself will be destabilized. Trump accused Traore of selling Africa to the East. But Africans saw the truth. The West's fear was not about instability. It was about losing control. And as that realization spread, what began as a crisis became a continental awakening. By month's end, sanctions had failed. The gold reserve was still young, but the idea was unstoppable. Then came the turning point. A leak from Europe exposed secret memos. The gold seizure was ordered under U.S. pressure, with explicit instructions to use African gold as IMF collateral. The memos even outlined funding opposition movements to derail the reserve. One line was damning. "Without control of their gold, IMF leverage will collapse. This cannot be allowed." When published in African media, the effect was explosive. The West could no longer deny. What was once framed as responsibility was exposed as coercion. Traore addressed his people. "They call this law. But law is not written in secret memos. Law is not the theft of another nation's wealth. This is not about debt. This is about domination." The leak flipped the story. Africa was no longer on the defensive. The West was scrambling. Across the continent, newspapers declared, "Our gold, their debt." Callers on radio shouted, "They steal and call it justice." Tens of thousands filled Independence Square. Miners raised their tools. Farmers carried grain baskets, vowing support. Students waved banners. "Our gold, our freedom." The anger had turned to pride. Mali declared, "If they seize one of us, they seize all of us." Niger pledged uranium reserves. Guinea promised bauxite revenues. The reserve was no longer just Burkina Faso's dream. It was Africa's project. Trump raged. Europe denied. But the signatures on the memos told the truth. In a fiery address, Traore declared, "They wanted to bury us with shame. Instead, they have planted a seed. And that seed is unity." The invisible coup had failed. The seized gold had backfired. Burkina Faso never recovered that shipment. But in losing it, Africa gained something greater: conviction. What was stolen became the spark of unity. What was meant as humiliation became the foundation of a new future. The African Gold Reserve, once only an idea, was now a living project. Traore stood before a sea of flags at the AES summit and spoke words that would echo for generations. They thought our gold was collateral, but it is not collateral. It is freedom. And freedom does not beg, it builds. And across the continent, people felt it. The winds of change. The awakening of dignity. The rebirth of sovereignty. If the spirit of Ibrahim Traoré inspires you, share this story. Subscribe to the channel to follow the journey of an Africa that no longer bows its head. God bless Africa.